Hi.
Hello, dear friends. I'm very happy to introduce you Linas, who is the student of master program at Vilnius University. Also, we can say that Linas is the student of the Center for Asian and Transcultural Studies within the Vilnius University. It's kind of formal information, and I hope Linas will tell us more about himself.
So basically you're correct with my formal introduction. Currently I'm studying in the master, and my program is called Modern Asian Studies. So since bachelor's I was always focusing to Asian cultures and history and politics and whatever that there is in Asia, and mostly in South Asia. But I also had a background in NGO called Yong Wave. It's an organization, non-governmental, which is basically grounded in Lithuania, but we're also working in international arena. Mostly we are doing the harm reduction services with mostly drug-related topics, like, for example, education about drugs, about the harm reduction of drugs, the history and culture. So I kind of tried to collide these two things, two of my interests, the Asia and the drugs. And well, in Asia you can find a lot of history, a lot of culture, what relates to the psychoactive substances. So in my research I take the anthropological focus, and I try to dig into the drug scene of various countries, especially the India. I worked there during my bachelor's, and also Nepal. But I try to do a little bit of investigation in other countries, because almost every country has a very interesting and very unique culture of the psychoactive substances. So yeah, that's kind of a...
Yeah, and I can ask you why, in general, why did you decide to dedicate at least like 4 years of your life, even 5 now, to study South Asian culture, not Far East, I don't know, culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, after I finished the school, I really wanted to go to the university, but I didn't know which subject should I study, and I took a gap year. I was working here and there. I was working in a hotel with international people. I was also volunteering in the military force of Lithuania. So I had plenty of time to think about what interests do I still have from my childhood. And in my childhood I used to grow up with lots of books of travelers, movies like Tour or Indiana Jones. They were my heroes. And just then, by the sort of accident, I found this program in Vilnius University. At that time it was called Oriental Studies. Right now it's Asian and Transcultural Studies. So I just took a shot. I didn't know back then what I will do with that. So I just went with the flow, basically. And yeah, so here I am right now. I'm still interested in what I'm doing, and my passion is travel, other cultures, and I believe that there's a lot to be done in sort of understanding other cultures and building sort of a bridges between, West and East, if you will. So.
And you mentioned, as I think, very valuable thought that's like we have to dig into our childhood, to understand what interest we really have, kind of hint how to choose the profession, how to at least start to think about what you want to do in your life in general. Yeah, and about your insights, about the South Asian culture of using drugs, psychedelics. What did you find during your researches, theoretical and practical?
Yeah, well, it again depends on the drug, I guess, but if we take the oldest, or at least one of the oldest archaeological findings, and especially the textual findings. Atharvaveda talked about the soma, which is until now nobody can answer clearly what it is. There are many speculations, from alcohol to datura to other drugs. So maybe it even be some metaphorical, thing. But what was more concrete, and the same Atharvaveda, it was mentioned about the bhang. And bhang, well, I think in that particular time it was referred to the cannabis in general. But nowadays, when you talk about bhang, especially in South Asian countries, India and Nepal mostly, we have in mind a special drink that is made from the cannabis and milk and some other ingredients. Mostly it's like basically a milkshake that has a strong psychoactive effect of a kind of a edible. It's a kind of a cannabis-infused drink.
Just make it clear. So bhang can be smoked and can be drinked. Because like common sense is that bhang is something to smoke, right?
Yeah, I think right now bhang is referred to a drinkable substance usually, but if we will talk with sadhu, if we will talk with other, especially the holy men who smokes a lot, the chilans usually, so I think sometimes they do refer to it as a bhang as well. But there's another word of ganja, which is also Sanskritic, and ganja usually refers to that just a raw cannabis plant and the part that you smoke. And also with that, talking about the bhang a little bit more further, there's that story of Shiva when, I will try to make it very short, there was this poison called kalakuta, or hala hala, I think, if I'm pronounced correctly. And these poisons, they came into the world, and both devas and asuras, the various mythological creatures, were very afraid of that poison, particularly because it could destroy them. And Shiva, he took the poison and he drank it. Later, his throat became blue, and he even became known for that. But what was happening after that, his wife Parvati gave him bhang to ease the discomfort of that poison. So I think it was one of the first and very important mentioning of bhang as remedy, as some medicine and so on. But of course, when we talk about the Shiva and cannabis, there's especially the people who use drugs, the cannabis in a religious way during the Shivratri celebration. I think most of them really kind of push that narrative, like the cannabis is a holy plant that you should smoke because Shiva smoked himself, and so on and so on. But there is also another narrative of that people should be aware that there should be no intoxication at all, that the true meditation comes from within. So we have to be aware of that, and these all mythological stories, they could be and are interpreted in various ways. So this is what applies to a cannabis and bhang, but still predominantly I would say that cannabis smoking culture is much more accepted by the majority of society than, for example, alcohol. This would be a difference from the European society, the Western societies, and so on. So,
it helps what? According to the religious tradition, for example, according to Shaivit theology or practices, what does it do?
Yeah, so in Atharvaveda you can find the precise recipes. For example, I think in Ayurveda especially it's mentioned how cannabis helped to relieve certain illnesses, or even for the animals, if animals have diarrhea or some other illnesses, sometimes the cannabis are precisely the thing that people give them to relieve the discomfort or to relieve the symptoms, and it applies to a human as well. I will not right now exactly mention which illnesses are there, but usually they're just helping to relieve some symptoms. Another thing is that meditation aspect during the Shivratri, especially when I was in Nepal. I was in one of the biggest Shiva temples, and lots of people used to go there, and during the whole day people smoked, and they were just in a spiritual joy. They're experiencing spiritual joy, and some of them are just meditating under the influence of cannabis. But again, not all of them. Some people strictly says that it is just another intoxicant that people should avoid. That true spiritual happiness and spiritual attainment comes from within. So it depends on the opinions. Yeah.
But generally, it means that this substance will help somehow to reach some certain state of consciousness.
Yes.
Kind of just a small support in this process.
Yeah.
Right?
I think it applies mostly to a holy man who, like sadhu. Usually, even in India, by the holy rivers, or in Nepal, especially during Shivratri, you will see a lot of them, and they will be smoking a traditional way of chilam, and for them the laws are really it not applies. Basically, it's important to say that both India and Nepal criminalized weed in I think 70s and 80s, and it was mostly the impact of Westerners and the war on drugs which was started by the Richard Nixon. But I think it changed a lot because cannabis became sort of a taboo, and the police still catches people smoking or selling cannabis. But it depends. Like again, if we take the Shivratri, if we take the holy man, it does not apply to them. Or there are many places in the Himalayas, especially, for example, in Nepal, and it applies to India as well. The cannabis grows wildly just by itself. You can see everywhere, and there are so many in rural places, so many farms and villagers go to quite isolated places. They grow there, so the police sometimes, if they find out, they do raids and they try to destroy the fields. Sometimes it happens, but I was told by one pro-legalization activist a very interesting story when the police came to the place to for raid, to destroy the fields. And the farmers themselves, the villagers, said that it's a holy place. Shiva himself wanted that the cannabis would grow here. And if you will cut the cannabis, something bad might happen to the villagers or even to you or your family members. And police got a bit scared. Yeah, of course, the story has more context because in that place, particularly it was a northern side of Kathmandu, the hilly area, and the thing was that there was a lot of suicides and deaths recorded in that place. But the reason was that people there used to make the alcohol in a very in a cheap way, and sometimes from the alcohol fumes they used to get addicted. Later they try to get away from that addiction. They used to go to depression. They used to kill themselves. So it's a very, very deep problem with lots of aspects. But still, from that it came just saying that the Shiva, the cannabis, and if you will do harm the cannabis, you will harm the Shiva. So sometimes they play on that.
the most interesting thing that police kind of agreed with it, yeah, and started to be scared about it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Then, how you come to the film work? How you succeed in this quite difficult task to be kind of insider there? Yeah.
It takes time. Like it is usually a difficult task, and of course it depends on the research and on the group. But my previous research was on the legal opium farmers in India, and I had to enter the community of theirs, and so I used to go to rural villages, and I just, by the accident, my neighbor, who was also a student, my peer, we became friends, and later I came to know that his parents were the opium growers, the legal opium growers. So I just went with him to visit his family, and through him, I spent some time with the village community. They started to trust me, and then later I was introduced to other legal opium farmers that gave me the interviews. But of course I was not recording with camera, still I noticed that many things they were kind of a little bit afraid to tell, because there's lots of problems with the black market, with sometimes even with addiction, illegal affairs. So that's why some of the things they were telling was off the camera, off the record. So not everything I included even to the research, just out of respect. But I try to, I try to spend as much time as possible, and so that they would trust me. And it applies, almost to every anthropological research, but when it comes to especially something that might have illegal side, you just have to spend enough time, and it's a matter of luck, it's a matter of your personality, whether you can really gain the trust, and of course assure the ethic rules that you're following, that you assure the anonymity of the people, so that they could feel more comfortable of sharing various aspects of their life and work.
You were working with the youth, right? And like in Europe, usually the problem with all these substances connect with the youth culture, like mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe you noticed how it goes in India, in Nepal, like the young people also treat the usage of the drugs like something cool, like from this point of view, did you see or did you notice in general some difference of the youth culture concerning drugs?
Well, I think that in major sense it's quite similar. Young people are always everywhere. Young people, they're curious, they want to try something new, and if it's forbidden and dangerous, the forbidden fruit, it's always more attractive. So I would say it's pretty similar. Yeah, but of course I could not tell you exactly, and I believe there's a lack of statistics of young people who use drugs, and whether, what are the numbers of the population, who use in various European countries and India and Nepal. But having in mind that religious aspects, sometimes young people are introduced to cannabis or opium even from their families, who are, for example, using that. Of course, it's a rare case, but yeah, it happens.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, because generally such kind of drugs as cannabis, like people treated it more tolerant, right? There than here in Europe. That's why I thought maybe there it's not that much prohibited fruit, and like young people find some other means to enjoy, to be cool.
Well, I believe sometimes in, especially if we take the Nepal, you know, the Shivratri is the day for, I guess, when the cannabis usage become much more normalized.
Yeah,
So they have a different kind of approach to that than we would have. But I think the war on drugs that happened in the later 20th century and still happening in a sense, I think it kind of made very similar, even taboo aspect to forbidden drugs by the law. And I believe lots of people, especially the older people, they are afraid that they or their kids might face, you know, the circumstances, the fines, or sometimes even the jail. So I think the societies became much more stricter with every forbidden drug. But again, that made it taboo and the topic that it's a little bit hard to speak. That's why the people do not speak with the kids about, you know, what are the cannabis or other drugs, what are the risks, and, you know, now we come to that harm reduction topic. So I believe when you have the taboo, or when it becomes a taboo, there's a bigger risk in every sense, I believe.
Yeah. The more you prohibit something,
Yeah.
the more temptation to
Yes.
use it, to try it. And did you notice some difference of drug culture, psychedelic culture here in Europe and in India, in Nepal, for example? Like, what is the major principal difference in general?
Oh, there are many differences, and there are differences almost in every case. Even if we take the one country, the Lithuania, every couple of years the tendencies might change, and it depends on many factors. On, for example, how the trade is going on, what kind of substances are, for example, sometimes even invented and become popular.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
So it depends, but if we take the psychedelic and the traditional ways, well, in Europe I believe there's at least from my experience, there's a much bigger kind of a scene of festivals, scene of nightclubs, for example, and or even certain styles of music. I would even go even to that, because it does make difference in tendencies of substances, the night culture basically, and the traditions. And it comes from a very kind of a simple things, even the alcohol and the cannabis. The alcohol usage in Europe is much more culturally appropriate in a way. We can find it, you know, in the families. Of course, I'm very simplifying and I'm talking in general, but what happens in India, or especially in the Nepal, the cannabis are much less a taboo topic than alcohol sometimes. And well,
but is it legal there?
No. No, it's criminalized, but culturally sometimes it's accepted. For example, the Shiva god, he is associated with cannabis and bhang, the byproducts of cannabis, a lot. And during the Shiva...
Oh my god. But psychedelic substances, it's still something else. How this topic came into your life?
Well, when I was in the school, I was living in a sort of a bit dangerous environment, I would say. There was a lot of illegal underground drug dealing happening all over the place, in the school, around the school and everything. So I kind of grew up in that environment, and you know, later I moved away from that in a very, very different places, such as, you know, military or right now Vilnius University, and I find very different circumstances, but still my background is still with me, and that knowledge, that experience that I got, I kind of see an opportunity to try to look at it from a theoretical perspective, from the academical perspective, and try to use it in a good way, to introduce others and to try to, well, basically, for example, the knowledge about psychoactive substances and the people who use drugs, I kind of understand their language and kind of understand why they are doing that and how they are doing that. So I'm trying to dig deeper, and anthropological knowledge that I learned in university helps me to connect with such people in other countries and try to understand with what problems do they face, because usually it's quite stigmatized communities, and I want to find a dialogue with them, and I want to try to, in a way, help each other by just basically building common understanding between us. By us, I mean government, policymakers, law enforcement, and the people who use drugs or who deal drugs or who grow drugs or whatever. So.
And you think this dialogue improves everything, yes?
Well, definitely.
It can really influence the problem, because I guess no one can refuse that it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
But still,
we
you believe in some better approach to it, yeah?
I believe that in, well, every problem, when we approach it, we should start with dialogue, because usually there are two or more sides, and we should listen to both of them. But what comes to drugs, I don't believe that drugs is always a problem. I don't believe that drugs are good. I don't believe that drugs are bad. I think that we make them either good or bad. And as an example, most of the drugs, if not all, can be used in a good way, as a medicine, or even in a recreational way sometimes. But it could be people with bad intentions might have hands on them, or people just without knowledge of basic harm reduction methods or harm reduction rules might do harm for themselves if they do not know how to use it or how to behave. And it applies for the alcohol, for example, one of the most popular drugs, which is very harmful, but still in so many countries we have a certain culture of alcohol. And you can take South Europe, for example, where people grow up with, you know, with the knowledge of what is wine, when people drink it, how much do they drink it, and usually they have, well, there's a tendency to have less addiction disease than, for example, when we come to other regions where there is no proper understanding, where there's still taboo of alcohol, and so, you know, problem comes from that. So yeah. Here there's another problem, which is, I think, in a recent decades it came up into academical sphere, and even in the recent years, about the indigenous knowledge, about, especially if we talk about the psychedelics, such as ayahuasca, mescaline, some kind of magic mushrooms. They usually tend to be part of a deep tradition, a religious tradition to some indigenous communities. And just recently I read a nice article, I forgot the author name, but basically she's a Mexican. She grew up in a small community in Mexico, and what she's trying to solve in her work is that how West still sort of colonizing the indigenous knowledge and using for their own good, but the Western scientists usually create, they do not pay attention to the traditional methods of usage, which could be crucial in the usage. So, for example, we talked about the psychedelics, the term psychedelics. Basically, this is a Western science term. What would be more appropriate for the indigenous communities, especially I'm talking about her as an example, spiritual medicine or medicine of spirit, something like that. But this is a very new problem, and it shows that we progress. Like, especially in Lithuania, we have a quite taboo still about lots of drugs, and we have a very big criminalization here in the country. But also there's an important thing, as many people mentioned, the psychedelic renaissance, or even the renaissance of psychoactive substances, when especially in certain countries like US, but also you can find it in Asia, such as Thailand, they're starting to implement harm reductionist suggestions to liberalize the laws and help people to avoid taboo, like to make psychoactive substances something that, something that we firstly could talk and solve the issues, because when it's criminalized, people are afraid even to talk. So this is one of the biggest problems. But when it's happening, then we face other problems, as I mentioned, that indigenous knowledge. So I don't know the answer to that, but I believe right now there's a big progress going on that. But of course, progress might lead to something also negative. So we have to be very steady, I guess, with what is happening right now, and try to listen to as well many opinions, more than just avoid echo rooms, I guess, as Western scientists usually do.
Makes sense. What exactly did you do, or do you do now?
Yeah, so Young Wave is not an old organization. We exist about 5 or 6 years, and I volunteered there, by the way, about 5 years almost. So we do numerous activities. Everything basically started from going to the festivals. During the summer season, we have lots of festivals, especially in the nature, where lots of people gathers, and in some festivals people tend to use various drugs. And what Young Wave tries to do is that ensure the basically harm reduction, and we try to spread the information about certain drugs. We do drug testing. For example, people can come up to us with some sort of drugs that they don't know what it is, or they just guessing what it is, and we just do very simple chemical tests, and then we can say, not for 100%, but usually we are quite correct on what kind of a substance it is. So sometimes people in this case could avoid some new psychoactive substances that are much less tested and might be much more harmful or dangerous. So after the test, sometimes people use it in a smaller dosage if they believe it could be dangerous, or even throw it out. Sometimes they do that. And we also do trip sitting, for example, if people are tripping on psychedelics quite heavy and they feel that they cannot control it. So we prepare a cozy environment, or some sort of a safe space where people can come up and just away from all the noise, away from all the lights, and everything can be in a cozy tent, you know, with nice decorations, and we are there who talk with them, and we kind of go through their experience, not just much more smoothly. And there are different other things. Right now I don't go to festivals that much. It's quite a tough job, I have to say, but
everybody is partying and you're working now.
Yeah, and then it's, you know, you have to do that, you know, so you basically give some sort of psychological help to the people, and you have to stay awake and be ready for various different situations during the whole night, and, you know, a couple of nights in a row even. So what I do, I right now concentrate much more on international work, on collaboration with other organizations, with making trainings and various projects. So for example, about 3 years ago, I did this research with the team together about the drug scene in Lithuania, and how people, what various institutions and, well, basically representatives of government or non-governmental sectors and so on, what do they think about drug testing practice in Lithuania, which is not regulated by the law, but, well, it is not illegal too. So it's kind of a old practice, relatively old practice in many countries in West Europe and US, but it's a very new thing that we started in Lithuania, and sometimes it gets controversial, especially from the media or some conservative politicians. But on the other hand, from other institutional institutions, we get very big support, even the governmental institutions and so on. So it was kind of a difficult topic, but in the results we basically recommended some set of the harm reduction methods, you know, for the future, for other organizations. And I try to combine it with my interest in my studies, because usually during my studies I go abroad to usually South Asian countries, and I try to do research there and try to compare it to the situations, trying to understand their problems as a sort of an outsider, but, you know, in anthropology it could be beneficial, but it could kind of not help you that much as well. So there was one interesting topic about the opium growers in India, the legal opium farmers who get the license. The legal. Basically, there's a thing that, of course, there are illegal farmers, but the legal ones, they get the license from the government, and they are licensed to grow well, basically the exact number of, you know, exact size of the field of opium, and they do it in a very traditional way, because the opium is about 1,000-year-old tradition in India. Yeah, it came from the Middle East, and before that it came, I think US archaeological findings says that about 10,000 years ago, or 8,000 years ago, something in between, the opium and poppies were grown in Central Europe. So this plant has vast history and vast traditions and culture and so on and so on. But the thing is that in India, opium has lots of various ways of usage. For example, if we take the Rajasthan, lots of people, they do, not lots of people, but some part of the people, they use opium in a certain way during the weddings or other type of festivals, which is illegal. But what was the biggest thing, the biggest focus that I tried to investigate, is that farmers are the ones who choose basically whether the opium would go to the black market or to a legal sector as a medicinal, you know, so much morphine, codeine, diamorphine, so many medicine drugs are made from the opium, and, you know, they are exported to all kinds of countries around the world. And lived with the farmers and I tried to investigate what are the key factors for them in this choice. And they do understand, the possible harm of opium in underground.
But again, how could they decide to provide it to some wrong people if government controlled, if it's legal?
Well, they go against the law.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they do choose that because the situation right now it's quite harsh for the farmers. It's a very old tradition, as I mentioned, and if you are an opium farmer in I was in Madhya Pradesh. If you are an opium farmer, you you are seen as a privileged farmer, a little bit like you are in a higher level of farming, and people tend to respect you. So it is some sort of a privilege.
Because you get money from it? More money than usual common
That's
farmer?
the issue. They used to get, but the thing is that you get firstly the license, which is hard to obtain. But the thing is that right now the price of the opium, if they sell it in a legal way to the government, it really came down in a recent decade, and the conditions they are quite harsh because farmers lose a lot of insurance of, for example, what kind of a yield they will have. Like there are more and more strict rules, and for them it's a little bit hard to manage and manage the proper income from the opium. So, and there's always a black market where they can sell sometimes even 100 times better price for the same kg. So this is kind of a thing, they risk a lot. They risk 10 years of a jail, they risk huge fine, but they still do it because they need to somehow survive.
Thank you very much for your insights, for your interesting story, for your talk in general.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, and it's a very broad topic, and it applies to many aspects, and different countries has different approaches. So I don't know if the viewers would be interested, they could write in comments, somehow I could answer, I guess.
I
if I could.
Still have many questions, but we don't have time. And I hope we will keep in touch some way, and maybe later we'll develop some specific aspects of this topic, of these wide topics, and maybe you will help us to develop some questions which are interesting to you. Thank you.